Good afternoon, Sakelanders. How are you? This is going to be just what they call like a colloquial or a. There's another word that they use, just like a kind of semi-informal layman's rundown outline of what is cooking in Ukraine, Russia, China, Brics, Saudi Arabia, Iran. Okay, so Russia is a very long country. It is 11 time zones long, and it borders on many other countries. And the Caucasus Mountains define roughly, very roughly, where Caucasians come from. So west or north and west of the Caucasus meant to be the white peoples of the world, and south and east of the Caucasus you start to get the Asiatic races and so on. Right. In the Caucasus, there are a number of countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Russia itself, Dagestan, Chechnya, those countries or republics of Russia, of the Russian Federation, are also in the Caucasus. Turkey borders the Caucasus, the far northeastern point of Turkey, and the far northwestern point of Iran. Historically, there's always the Sunni Shia thing. Basically, it goes back to the death of Muhammad. The Shia people, the Shias believed, the correct name is Shiat Ali. The Shiat Ali believed that the succession to Muhammad was handled wrongly. It was cheating. The Shia are about 1 in 10 of the Muslims worldwide, and not quite, but roughly 9 in 10, because there are others as well, but Shia and Sunni are the main guys, main factions. Most Muslims are Sunni. Right. Turkey is Sunni. Iran is Shia. So too is Iraq, by the way, although it has always been dominated by a region in the center of Iraq called the Sunni Triangle. But it's a Shia country. So, Iran and Russia are allies. Russia and Armenia, which is a Christian country, are allies. Turkey and Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim country, a Sunni country, are allies. So there's this strange alliance through Armenia between Russia, Armenia, and Iran. And they are mortally opposed to Turkey and Azerbaijan. Okie dokie. Now, we know that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa form Brics. Although South Africa forms a woefully pathetic part of Brics. Woefully weak and inept. We know that when Russia went to war and sanctions were opposed, they immediately countered those sanctions with a number of initiatives. One of them is to replace or to substitute the 4 big global credit cards: American Express, I just know I'm going to mess this up, Visa, American Express, there's another one, and Diners Club, kind of, although Diners Club is not really a credit card, but those card payment systems that have dominated the world for the past 40 years, although they were introduced long before that. Another one of the initiatives was to was a substitute for the SWIFT payment system. If you do transactions between countries, banks, if I pay somebody in the USA some money, it goes via SWIFT. There's a code, there's this, that, the next thing. We know also that that China, Iran, and Russia have taken great strides toward trading without the dollar as the currency of final settlement. When you buy something from China, in your mind, or to all appearances, I should say, it looks as if you're exchanging rand for yuan, or won as they pronounce it. Renminbi, actually. But you're not. You're exchanging rand for dollars and dollars for one, which gives a lot of artificial value to the dollar. The petrodollar is something similar to what I've just described. It's not the same, but it's roughly similar. Now, they're also circumventing the petrodollar by selling fuel in other currencies, which hitherto has been impossible. You had to buy crude oil in... This blasted dog of mine is distracting me so much! Judith! In dollars. Okay. Now, in all of this, Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni country, it is the heart of Islam, if you like. Makkah and Medina are in Saudi Arabia, the two holiest sites of Islam, and they have a super duper on steroids type of Islam there. It's Sunni, but it's called Wahhabi Islam. So, Saudi Arabia, for that reason, hates Iran, where Shia Islam is based. Unbelievably, incredibly, between the Ruskies and the Chinky Chonks, they've managed to get the Saudis and the Iranis into a rapprochement. Two of history's greatest enemies, most mortal foes, are now buddies overnight. How did that happen? It's because the Saudis, who have dominated the oil industry for many years, recognized that if they were the key player in getting the USA needed to artificially prop up the dollar. They did three things. In 1944, between the 2nd and the 22nd of June, I think it was, at the Hotel Washington in the village of Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, USA, we went onto the Bretton Woods system, whereby only one country in the world its currency would be backed by gold, that is the USA's, and everybody else's currencies would float against the USA's. And incredibly, people bought into it except the Russians. They were the only people who said no. And it was the Soviet Union technically, but I mean for practical intents and purposes, it was the Russians. And then in 1971, Nixon took the USA off the gold standard unilaterally. Everybody that had bought into Bretton Woods, yeah, we trust you, Mr. USA. You're going to keep your money backed by gold and then we'll float against you. Oh, you're such a good guy, Uncle Sam. Friday afternoon, Friday the 13th of August 1971, they take a decision. 3 men, boom, off the gold standard. The whole world effectively off the gold standard. That is abuse of hegemony. If there has ever been abuse of hegemony in all of history, because it meant that overnight all of the world's currencies were backed by nothing. Wicked, wicked, wicked. It was announced 2 days later on the Sunday afternoon, the 15th of August, and it was implemented actually only 2 years later in 1973. But for all intents and purposes, once it was announced, it was effective. Okie dokes, where were we? So, the third thing that they did was persuade the Saudis to persuade their friends in OPEC largely through the Arab Sunni thing, only ever to accept payment for petrol in dollars, meaning that people would go to have to buy US dollars in order to have the currency to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, you name it. It was a big gesmokkelerij. And that artificially strengthened the dollar to enable it to survive, if you like, the period of debt that was brought on largely, but not only, by the Vietnam War, and which was brought to its head in Donald Trump's presidency when he took the US debt accumulated over 200 years in the span of 4 years, from $19 trillion to $27 trillion. It was like 18.9 trillion to 26.9 trillion. 19 to 27 trillion dollars in 4 years. Which has left the USA in an utter crisis. I'm just going to pause for a second. To illustrate the point of how bad it is, the USA tax revenues are about federal tax revenues are about $3.5 trillion, but less. This year's proposed budget is this year's proposed budget is almost $7 trillion. So they're spending double what they're getting in. That means they have to not print, they just add a nil to a computer screen. They don't even go to the trouble of printing the money, really, I'm telling you the truth. Another $3.5 trillion just to balance this year's budget. And by the way, of that $7 trillion, $1 trillion of this year's budget will go just to servicing the USA's debt. It's debt to itself, in the sense that it's a debt to the Federal Reserve, to the extent that you may believe that the Federal Reserve is federal or reserve or a bank. It's a balagan. It's really spaghetti, stew, mess, disaster, catastrophe of the first order. And it's going to destroy all of us. It will. You'll see. So, now that the Russians and Chinese are acting to circumvent that, the petrodollar, the dollar of final settlement, the dollar as the currency of last resort, which is a completely different thing to the currency of final settlement. The Saudis can see the writing on the wall. So although they're meant to be very close, I think I didn't complete a sentence earlier. The deal with the Saudis was, if you will only accept payment for fuel or for oil in dollars, and you can persuade your Arab and Muslim makkers to do the same, we will help you with this, with that, with loans, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, defense, F-16s, whatever. It was a very dark smokkelary. Dark deal. The Saudis, though, at the end of the day, are going to act in their own national interests. And now that they can see that the Russia and China, particularly with the assistance of Iran, and I'm sure South Africa is making a heroic contribution, are subverting the dollar. They don't want to be the ones left holding the baby at the end of the night. In other words, they don't want to be stuck on the petrodollar, just as it's becoming meaningless. And so we've seen this unbelievable reconciliation in the history of Islam. In 1400 years, in 8 years' time, I'm not an expert, it'll be 1400 years old, I believe. Between the Sunnis and the Shiite Ali, what we are seeing is a phenomenal realignment of supra-geopolitical interests. It is, as somebody described it the other day, do you remember and I say this, often I over-explain things that I say in these videos for the benefit of the Afrikaans viewers. Because I know that I do have a tendency to use, some uncommon words. But remember I think it was Standard 9 geography. Tectonic plates. Tectonic plates. With Mrs. Pixie Hardman. She was a formidable lady. Anyway, somebody described it the other day as geopolitical tectonic plate shifting. Guys, you cannot overestimate it. It's not possible for you or me to exaggerate its importance. It's more important than the most flowery thing that we could say about it, or the most grand thing, the most grand description that we could give it. And you cannot overestimate it, and you must not underestimate it, because it will have effects that will reverberate around the globe for centuries to come, because it's unlikely to be nipped in the bud. And once completed, it will be well nigh impossible to undo it. Excuse me, I beg your pardon. I like to drink cold water or Oros fast. I like the explosion of cold on my palate. The only people who can prevent it from succeeding, and I've already said it's unlikely. The Chinese and the Russians have done what they've had to do too well. Are the North Americans, the Jip Japs and the Western and Central Europeans. And they're now being hamstrung. The Japanese have a very large problem in their economy. It's a subject for another video on another day. But the Europeans and the Americans are being hamstrung. There's just nothing. There is no opportunity for them to use whatever strength they have left to get this right. Or to get it right to prevent this global realignment. So it's now Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And by the day, new countries are asking to be included, perhaps not in Brics, but in the operations of this new center of power. For instance, the Sudanese and Zimbabweans, and you can laugh, but when it's the Sudanese, the Zimbabweans, the Malawians, the Mozambicans, the Venezuelans with the tiny country with the world's largest oil reserves, and Suriname, and Paraguay, and Ecuador, and Indonesia, the laughing is going to... So when you have 5 or 6 or 7 of the world's most powerful countries, and then a whole swarm of little acolytes, disciples, running after them, although those acolytes might seem like rats and mice and pathetic to you and me, in fact, they are building what can only be described as critical mass. The amount required to get something right. The critical mass. The minimum amount required to get something right. What we are witnessing is beyond huge. It is perhaps the greatest political event in the history of the world. Perhaps. I don't say it is, but perhaps. I forgot to mention to you that they are apparently working on a new currency. And whether or not they get that right, so we in South Africa, maybe we swap the rand for the whatever, and the Chinese, we're all using this one currency against the euro and the dollar. Whether or not they get that right, even if we retain sovereign currencies, and China retains the renminbi, they will be so heavily backed by gold that it will diminish in the mind of any serious person the value of a US dollar that is effectively backed by $32 trillion of minus of debt, and only at very best 8,000 tons of gold. The USA's gold holdings are very, very low. The Chinese, I read the other day, I've said this in many videos, have about 36,000 tons of gold. I read the other day that they may, and not today, not tomorrow, not the next day, not next week, but in the fullness of time, when the time is ripe, call in their citizens personal, private gold holdings. And that may take China's gold backing of the yuan, the renminbi. Renminbi is like rand. Yuan is like money. So if you talk about the Chinese yuan, you say the Chinese money. May take it to something like 60,000 tons as their war chest of gold to fight an economic war. Maybe not. I'm using the topmost figures. So there's a probability that I'm exaggerating, but I want to keep this simple and talk about how severe this may become, which would be something like 1/6.5, so 2/13, 1 in 6.5 of all of the gold mined in history, which is about 400,000 tons. So in a few short decades, they would have bought up billions of lifetimes and thousands of years of human gold. And now they're going to war. Ladies and gentlemen, don't say you weren't warned. Our world is going to change before our eyes drastically in a very short span of time. No matter what happens, whether the Chinese invade Taiwan or not, whether the USA defends Taiwan with everything it has or not, as they claimed, with everything we have, whether the war in Ukraine becomes a thermobaric war or a tactical nuclear war or a strategic nuclear war or none of those three things, thermobaric, tactical and strategic nuclear. Excuse me. I beg your pardon. No matter what, everything is going to change before our very eyes in a very short span of time. And I solemnly advise you to place yourselves in that percentage of people that shall do best. Even if you're a single mother of 7 children and you only earn 6,000 Rand a month and it's practically impossible for you to do anything, you can yet do something. And every little bit of effort that you make will elevate you in the echelons of the hierarchy of probability of survival. Hundreds of millions of people around us are about to be decimated. By these events. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please like, share, subscribe, and if you can, please donate. It's easy. Visit saintlanders.org. Easy. Press enter there, scroll to the bottom of the page, and you'll find a number of vectors, a number of ways, to make a donation. Thanks a lot. Goodbye, and God bless you.